Hi, I'm Pat Barrett, and I'd like to discuss an issue starting with when I lived in Ohio. Migrant workers came up from Mexico to harvest beets, and so I knew one what we called Mexican kid. Okay, I think his parents must have put down roots there in Ohio. That was in the 40s. In the 50s, 51, I came to Phoenix. And I went to, I didn't really see any Mexican Americans or Mexicans to speak of until I went to high school, and there were two in our school. That was in North Phoenix. There were fair number of Hispanics, the term used now. Back then it was Mexican American. And along with that were what we called Mexican nationals, people who were citizens of Mexico who were staying here, with or without proper paperwork. It was not this huge issue, but we were aware that there were people who were here without papers, and I had a friend who worked for the Immigration Naturalization Service, INS, and he literally would chase down people who were supposedly here without papers. And there was the thing that we were aware of as I got older and went to worked in restaurants and things. Something in Spanish you call a pitazo, which is like a whistle. It's what we call dropping the dime on someone. It is phoning a tip in to immigration, saying there's a guy working here, I think he's an illegal, blah, blah, blah. So that was always there, but it wasn't a big thing. But in 1993, we elected a sheriff here called Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and he was reigned here, and including a reign of terror to 2017, when he was finally voted out. People got tired of him. But he practiced what we call racial profiling. And I worked with a woman in 2007 who had run a video store. Back in those days, we got movies and things on videotapes, and you went to a video store and rented them, and she catered to Hispanics. And the whole downtown area one day was just swept by the Chandler police, and they were chasing people all over and around. It was really, really bad. That was in the late 90s. What happened in the 90s basically was NAFTA, a trade agreement, pretty much ruined the farm livelihood of many people in Mexico, and they began moving north for jobs. And at that same time, there were I remember 70s, 80s, there was a growing number of Hispanics, Mexican Americans for the most part, who were occupying positions of some authority, entrepreneurs, heads of agencies, especially in education and so forth, and I discovered that many of them were the offspring of miners who had come to the copper mines in Arizona from Mexico. And they made a decent living and could send their kids to college. This was true in, like I say, the 70s, even the 80s. Things began changing with the Civil Rights Act and so forth. But at that time, that was a major change in our society, that you could go to work and find your boss was Hispanic, Spanish speaking. My son then in the 90s worked in a school district in West Phoenix that was like 90% Mexican, and including Mexican nationals, many of whom without papers. And he said you could tell when the Immigration Service was in the neighborhood. The Spanish term la migra. When la migra trucks were around, the kids would come to school. I mean, they couldn't do anything. They were just really upset because they thought they might go home and their parents would not be there. So there was kind of a terrorist activity of that type going on, even then. It got worse. We began, for example, the influx of Hispanics, in my case, that I saw as a teacher at a high school. When I first started in 1987, the school was about 19% Hispanic, and that was considered, it's a terrible thing to say, but we were the ghetto school because we had a few Hispanic kids and a few black kids, and the other kid, this is in Mesa, the other schools were very, very white, okay? But we went from 19% Hispanic to 45% by 2007 when I retired. And that was that influx of Hispanics in the 90s. And I remember driving down a major street in Phoenix where my dad lived and around where I grew up, where I went to school, Camelback High School. And I saw signs on stores in Spanish. And that surprised me. Now, this was, in the early 2000s. But when you're raised in that, and you never see anything Hispanic, anything Mexican, maybe a Mexican restaurant here and there, But signs, advertising, everything in Spanish. So things changed pretty rapidly. But, borders in any country are always fluid. People go back and forth. This was true with our border. Why do people come here from Mexico? For work. Why do they find work? Because business people want to hire them. And there was even kind of a joke, a bad joke, that certain construction companies, when they were building these housing developments, if a green truck, the immigration trucks were green for some reason, when a green truck rolled through, half your workforce went over the fence. But this became hysterical, I would say. Hysterical, starting in the 2000s. And finally, Trump came along, and with his good friend, Stephen Miller, who has been the one person that has been a steady element in his two administrations, Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller despises immigrants of any kind. And they use that fear of immigrants to develop what became what's called a Praetorian Guard. And a Praetorian Guard goes back to Roman times, and the purpose of the Guard was public order, so anti-illegal immigration, right? Secret police, going into people's homes, pulling people out, right? And finally, a personal bodyguard for the dictator, or the tyrant, Donald Trump. And that's what a Praetorian Guard is. That goes back, of course, in the 20th century to the Nazis, Mussolini's black shirts, and so forth. And in this country, we've always had militias that were primarily to prevent slave rebellions. We had vigilantes. We had the Klan. My wife remembers the police bursting into her parents' home for no reason when she was a little girl in East Texas. And we always had posses. Some posses were legitimate, others not so much. So it's part of our history. However, Trump has weaponized this whole idea of a border patrol sent into the interior of our country as a secret police force and a public order force. And what we saw in Minneapolis was what they are capable of. And it is our job, when we go out and vote, to make sure that the Republican Party, which has supported this invasion, this devastation of American law and order, put an end to it. Don't vote Republican, vote Democratic. Thank you.